My dad died last Tuesday. Heart attack at 67. It wasn't completely unexpected. He'd had some issues the past couple of years, but it still hit me like a truck. We weren't super close, but he was my dad, you know? The funeral was yesterday morning, and honestly, it was exactly what you'd expect. Small service, maybe 30 people, mostly his co-workers from the post office where he'd worked for 23 years. I live about 40 minutes from the cemetery, in the same house I grew up in. Dad left it to me when Mom passed 5 years ago, and since my divorce last year, it's just been me rattling around in this 3-bedroom ranch. It's not fancy, but it's paid off, and in this economy, that's something. After the service, my Aunt Linda, Dad's sister, came back with me. She wanted to help go through some of his things, maybe make some dinner. Dad had been living in the assisted living place downtown for the past 8 months, but he still had boxes of stuff in the garage and his old bedroom. Linda's always been the practical one in the family. She brought grocery bags and seemed determined to have everything sorted by Sunday. "You shouldn't be alone tonight," she kept saying while we worked. "Why don't you come stay at my place?" I told her I was fine. Honestly, I just wanted to be by myself. The whole day had been people telling me how sorry they were, asking if there was anything they could do, giving me those looks like I might break down any second. Sometimes you just want to sit in your own house without having to perform grief for anyone else. Linda left around 7 p.m. Before she went, she made me promise to call if I needed anything, and she put a casserole in my fridge. Tuna noodle, the kind she's been making since I was 10. "Just heat it up tomorrow," she said, giving me one of those long hugs that makes you feel like a little kid again. After she drove off, I sat in the kitchen for a while, just looking around. The house felt different somehow. Not bad different, just quiet in a way it hadn't been before. Dad hadn't lived here in months, but I guess knowing he was never coming back made it feel more final. I wasn't really hungry, so I skipped the casserole and made myself a peanut butter sandwich. I remember thinking how weird it was that I was eating peanut butter for dinner on the day I buried my father. Life doesn't pause for the big moments the way you think it should. I spent most of the evening going through Dad's old desk in the den. Nothing too interesting. Old bills, instruction manuals for appliances we didn't own anymore, a few birthday cards I'd sent him over the years. There was a photo of him and Mom at some company picnic from the 90s, both of them looking younger and happier than I remembered them being in recent years. The weird thing is, going through his stuff didn't make me cry. I kept expecting to break down when I found something meaningful, but mostly it just felt like cleaning out junk. His reading glasses were on the desk, still slightly bent where he'd sat on them last Christmas. His coffee mug, the one that said "World's Okayest Dad," that I'd gotten him as a joke, was still sitting on the windowsill with a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. I found his old address book, the kind with actual paper pages, and flipped through it. Half the people in there were probably dead themselves by now. He'd crossed out names in pencil when people moved or passed away, but there were still plenty of entries in his careful handwriting. Phone numbers for the dentist, the mechanic, his buddy Frank from work who'd retired 3 years ago. There was something sad about seeing all these connections written down like that. All these people who had been part of his daily life, and now the book was just sitting in a desk drawer collecting dust. I thought about calling Frank to let him know about the funeral, then realized Linda had probably already done that. By 10:30, I was exhausted. I'd been up since 5 a.m. getting ready for the funeral, and everything felt like it was catching up with me at once. I turned off the lights in the den and was heading to my bedroom when I heard it. 3 knocks on the front door. Not urgent, not loud, just normal knocks like someone was stopping by to borrow a cup of sugar. I checked the clock on the microwave. 10:47 p.m. Nobody comes by that late, especially not on a Tuesday. My first thought was that maybe Linda had forgotten something and driven back. But when I looked out the front window, the driveway was empty. Street was quiet too. The knocks came again. Same rhythm, same volume. 3 knocks, then silence. I stood in the hallway for a minute, trying to decide what to do. Our neighborhood is pretty safe, but it's not like we're in some gated community. Could be someone with car trouble, or maybe one of the neighbors dealing with some emergency. Mrs. Peterson next door is 84 and lives alone. Last winter, her furnace broke and she came over at midnight because she was scared to stay in the cold house by herself. I turned on the porch light and called out, "Who is it?" That's when I heard the voice. Rachel? It's me. I knew that voice. I'd been hearing it my entire life. It was my father's voice, clear as anything, coming from the other side of the door. I'm not going to lie. For about 3 seconds, my brain just refused to process what was happening. You know that feeling when something is so far outside normal that your mind tries to make it make sense? I actually thought, maybe the funeral home made a mistake. Like somehow they'd buried the wrong person, and Dad was standing on my front porch, wondering why everyone thought he was dead. But that passed pretty quickly. Rachel, open the door. I need to talk to you. Same voice. Same slight rasp he'd had ever since he quit smoking 10 years ago. Even the way he said my name. He'd always pronounced it Rachel instead of Rachel, like everyone else. I put my hand on the doorknob but didn't turn it. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. Dad? I said, feeling stupid even as the word came out. Yes, honey. Open the door. The word honey hit me like a physical thing. He hadn't called me that in years, not since I was a teenager. But that's how he used to talk to me when I was little and scared of thunderstorms or had a bad dream. I looked through the peephole. The porch light was on, but I couldn't see anyone standing there. Just the empty porch and my car in the driveway beyond. The welcome mat was slightly crooked from when Linda had wiped her feet earlier. I can't see you. I'm here, Rachel. Please. There was something in his voice I couldn't identify. Not exactly sadness, but maybe urgency? Like he was in a hurry or worried about something. The voice was definitely coming from outside. Not from inside my head, not from the TV or a phone or anything like that. Someone on the other side of the door was talking to me in my dead father's voice, and that someone was invisible. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 5 minutes. My legs felt shaky, and I realized I was holding my breath. Finally, I said, Dad, you died. I buried you this morning. Silence. The words sounded absurd coming out of my mouth, like I was explaining something obvious to a child. But what else do you say in that situation? I waited, still holding the doorknob, still listening. The normal night sounds came filtering back. A dog barking somewhere down the street. The hum of the air conditioner kicking on. A car driving by on the main road. Our street is usually pretty quiet after 9 p.m., mostly older folks and families with young kids. Hello? I called out. Nothing. I looked through the peephole again. Still nobody there. I unlatched the door chain. When had I put that on? And opened the door, keeping one foot braced against it so it wouldn't swing wide. The porch was empty. The motion sensor light across the street was off, which meant nobody had walked by in the last few minutes. I stepped outside in my socks and looked around the yard, checking the sides of the house where someone could potentially hide. Nothing unusual. My neighbor's porch lights were off. Everything looked exactly like it should at almost 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. The air was warm and still, typical for September in Ohio. I could smell the Johnson's barbecue grill from earlier in the evening, and something floral from Mrs. Peterson's garden. Normal smells, normal sounds, normal everything. I went back inside and locked the door. Then I double-checked it and put the chain back on. For the rest of the night, I sat on the couch in the living room with most of the lights on, trying to figure out what had just happened. I kept coming back to how normal the voice had sounded. Not scary or otherworldly or anything like that. Just Dad, talking the way he always talked. Maybe a little more gentle than usual. I thought about calling Linda, but what would I say? Hey, I know we just buried him, but I think Dad stopped by. She'd either think I was having a breakdown or she'd drive over here in her nightgown and spend the night on my couch. And I really didn't want either of those things to happen. Linda means well, but she's got this way of taking over when she thinks someone needs help. After my divorce, she showed up with cleaning supplies and reorganized my entire kitchen without asking. She'd probably want to take me to a doctor or have me stay with her for a week while she monitored my mental state. I also thought about going to stay at a hotel, but that seemed like an overreaction. I mean, nothing actually threatening had happened. Just 3 knocks and a familiar voice asking me to open the door. No demands, no anger, nothing that felt dangerous. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been different about Dad's voice. Not the sound of it, but something underneath, like when someone calls and says they're fine, but you can tell they're not. There had been something in his tone that didn't match the casual words. Around 2 a.m., I finally convinced myself to try sleeping. I left the hallway light on and kept my bedroom door open so I could hear if anyone came to the front door again. I also moved my cell phone to the nightstand and made sure it was charged, just in case. But the rest of the night was quiet. I dozed on and off, waking up every hour or so to listen for sounds that never came. By the time my alarm went off at 7 a.m., I felt like I'd been awake all night. This morning, I called the funeral home to confirm that everything had gone according to plan yesterday. The director, Mr. Walsh, seemed a little confused by my question, but assured me that yes, my father had been buried in Plot 47B at Riverside Cemetery at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, just as scheduled. "Is everything all right, Miss Morgan?" he asked. I told him everything was fine, just some paperwork questions. He offered to send me copies of the death certificate if I needed them, which seemed like a normal enough thing to offer that I said yes. After I hung up, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table trying to think of rational explanations for what had happened. Maybe it was someone playing a cruel prank, though I have no idea who would do something like that, or how they would have known Dad's voice well enough to imitate it that perfectly. Maybe it was some kind of audio delay from a TV or radio in one of the neighbors' houses. But that wouldn't explain why the voice had responded when I spoke, or why it had called me by name. Maybe grief does weird things to your hearing. I've read about people thinking they see or hear deceased loved ones in the days after they die, but I could swear the voice was coming from outside the door, not inside my head. And it had been so clear, so present. The thing that bothers me most is how normal it sounded. If I was going to hallucinate my dead father's voice, wouldn't it be more dramatic somehow? More meaningful? This was just Dad asking me to open the door like he'd done 1,000 times when I was growing up. I drove to the cemetery around 10 a.m. Dad's grave had fresh flowers on it, some from the service yesterday, some that Linda must have brought by this morning. The ground was still soft and dark from where they'd filled it in. There was a small metal marker with his name and dates, temporary until the headstone is ready. I stood there for maybe 15 minutes, looking down at the grave and trying to reconcile the fact that my father's body was 6 feet under the ground with the memory of hearing his voice at my front door 12 hours earlier. "If that was really you last night," I said out loud, feeling ridiculous, "I don't know what you want me to do about it." A couple walking their dog gave me a weird look, probably thinking I was having a breakdown in the cemetery. I got back in my car and drove home. So here I am, 24 hours later, still trying to make sense of what happened. I keep going over every detail, looking for something I missed, some explanation that would make this normal, but I can't find one. I haven't told anyone about this yet. Linda called this morning to check on me, and I almost mentioned it, but something stopped me. Maybe I want to see if it happens again before I start talking about it. Has anyone else experienced something like this? I'm not usually the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but I'm having trouble explaining what happened last night. I'll post an update if anything else happens. Thank you to everyone who reached out after my last post. I wasn't sure if I should write another update, but things have gotten stranger. I need to get this down while it's still fresh in my mind. It's been 3 days since the first incident with the voice at my door. I was starting to convince myself that maybe it really had been grief playing tricks on me. Linda came by Wednesday afternoon with groceries and helped me finish going through Dad's things. She kept watching me like she was waiting for me to have a breakdown, but I didn't mention what happened Tuesday night. We found some interesting stuff in Dad's bedroom closet. There was a shoebox full of old letters that Mom had written to him when they were dating in the 70s. Seeing Mom's handwriting again was harder than I expected. She had this careful, neat cursive that looked like something from a penmanship textbook. "Your mother always did have beautiful handwriting," Linda said, sitting on Dad's bed and reading through one of the letters. "She used to write me notes when we were neighbors back before you were born. I didn't know they'd lived near each other before I came along." Linda said Mom and Dad had rented a little apartment on Elm Street for their first 2 years of marriage, just 3 blocks from where Linda lived with her first husband. "They were so young," Linda said, looking at a photo from the box. It showed Mom and Dad at what looked like a church picnic, both of them maybe 25 years old. Dad was skinnier then, with a full head of dark hair, and Mom was wearing one of those flowy dresses that were popular in the late 70s. "Did they seem happy?" I asked. It's weird how you can grow up with your parents and still not really know what their relationship was like before you existed. Oh, they were crazy about each other, Linda said. Your dad used to call our house looking for your mom almost every day. He was completely smitten. We spent the rest of Wednesday sorting through clothes and deciding what to donate. Linda took Dad's winter coat, a heavy wool thing he'd worn for at least 15 years, and I kept his Yankees cap and his favorite flannel shirt. It sounds silly, but the shirt still smelled like him. That combination of Old Spice and the peppermint gum he was always chewing. Wednesday night was quiet. I made myself dinner, watched some TV, went to bed around 11. No strange voices, no knocking, nothing unusual. I was starting to think the whole thing had been some kind of stress reaction. Then Thursday happened. I was in the kitchen around 9 p.m. cleaning up after dinner when I heard footsteps on the front porch. Heavy footsteps, like someone wearing work boots. They walked across the porch from left to right, then back again, like someone pacing. I turned off the water and listened. The footsteps stopped. I went to the front window and looked out, but I couldn't see anyone. The porch light was on, and there was nobody there. But as I watched, I heard the footsteps start again. This time they went from the front door toward the porch's wing on the right side. That's when I remembered. Dad used to pace on the porch when he was thinking about something, usually when he was frustrated with work or trying to make some decision. He'd walk back and forth for 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes stopping to sit on the swing for a while. The footsteps stopped right where the swing was. I stood at the window for maybe 20 minutes, but I didn't hear anything else. No more walking, no voices, nothing. Just the normal sounds of evening. Cars passing on the main road. The Hendersons' dog barking at something in their backyard. I didn't go outside to check. I'm not sure why, but something about those footsteps felt different from Tuesday night's voice. More present, somehow. Like someone was actually out there, even if I couldn't see them. Friday morning, I called in sick to work. I teach 4th grade at Riverside Elementary, and I've only used 2 sick days in the past 3 years, so nobody questioned it. I told them I needed a few more days to deal with family stuff after the funeral, which was true enough. I spent Friday morning doing something I probably should have done earlier. I called Dad's doctor. Dr. Martinez had been seeing Dad for the past 5 years, ever since his regular doctor retired. I told her I was trying to understand more about Dad's final weeks, maybe to help with my own grief process. She was sympathetic and agreed to talk to me. Your father seemed to be in good spirits the last time I saw him, she said. That was about 3 weeks before he passed. His blood pressure was a concern, and we'd adjusted his medication, but he wasn't showing signs of immediate distress. I asked if Dad had mentioned anything unusual, any worries, any unfinished business, anything that might have been bothering him. He did ask me about memory issues, Dr. Martinez said. Nothing serious, just normal aging concerns. He said he'd been forgetting small things, misplacing his keys, that sort of thing. But his cognitive function seemed fine during our appointment. She paused for a moment, then added, he did mention that he'd been having trouble sleeping, said he kept hearing noises at night that made him think someone was trying to break into his apartment. Security checked it out several times, but they never found anything. That stopped me cold. What kind of noises? Knocking, mostly. Sometimes footsteps in the hallway outside his door. But the assisted living facility is pretty secure, and other residents weren't reporting anything unusual. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time thinking about what she'd said. Dad had been hearing knocking and footsteps in the weeks before he died. Now I was hearing knocking and footsteps in my house. That could be a coincidence. Or it could be my subconscious processing what Dr. Martinez had told me and creating experiences that matched Dad's. But she'd told me about his experiences after I'd already had mine. Friday afternoon, I decided to visit Dad's apartment. I still had his key, and the facility manager had said I could take my time clearing out his things. I'd been putting it off because it felt too final, but I needed to see if there was something there that might explain what was happening. Pine Grove Assisted Living is a nice enough place. Clean, well-maintained, staff that actually seems to care about the residents. Dad had a 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor, overlooking the courtyard where they have barbecues in the summer. His apartment still smelled like him, the same Old Spice and peppermint combination I'd noticed on his shirt. It was strange being in a space that was so clearly his. but that I'd only visited a handful of times. He'd moved there after a minor fall at home, and I think he was always a little embarrassed about needing help. Most of his furniture was the same stuff I remembered from growing up. His recliner, the TV tray he ate dinner from, the lamp with the crooked shade that Mom had always meant to replace. Seeing these familiar things in an unfamiliar space made everything feel temporary and sad. I was going through his nightstand when I found the notebook. It was a small, spiral notebook, the kind you'd use for a grocery list. But instead of groceries, Dad had been keeping a record of the noises he'd been hearing. The entries started about 6 weeks before he died. August 15th, knocking at door around 11 p.m. Staff says no one in hallway. August 18th, footsteps outside door. Checked hallway. Empty. August 22nd, knocking again. Very clear, 3 knocks. Asked Mike at front desk to check. Nothing. August 24, heard knocking from apartment 2C direction. Mrs. Patterson says she didn't hear anything. The entries continued for weeks. Sometimes just a date and knocking or footsteps. Sometimes longer descriptions. September 3rd, woke up at 2 a.m. to someone walking back and forth in hallway. Went to look, hallway empty, but motion sensor light was on. Security cameras show nothing. September 8th, 3 knocks on door, very deliberate, sounded familiar but can't place it. Staff checked within 2 minutes. No one around. The last entry was dated September 12th, just 4 days before Dad died. Someone calling my name from hallway. Sounded like, but that's impossible. Heart racing. Need to stop listening for these sounds. The handwriting on that last entry was shakier than the others, and he'd crossed out something after sounded like. I held the page up to the light, trying to make out what he'd written, but I couldn't tell. I sat on his bed for a while, holding the notebook and trying to process what I was reading. Dad had been experiencing something similar to what I was going through now, but his experiences had been at the assisted living facility, and mine were at our old house. What was the connection? I was getting ready to leave when Mrs. Patterson from next door knocked on the open apartment door. "Oh, honey," she said. "I didn't know you were here. I'm so sorry about your dad." Mrs. Patterson is probably in her 80s, with the kind of carefully styled white hair that requires weekly salon visits. She'd been living at Pine Grove longer than Dad, and they'd become friendly over his 8 months there. "He was such a nice man," she continued. "Always held the elevator for me, helped me carry my groceries from the lobby." I thanked her and was about to say goodbye when she added, "I hope you know he wasn't losing his mind or anything. Those sounds he kept talking about? I heard them too." I looked up from the box I was packing. "You heard knocking?" "Oh yes. Started in August, just like he said. Knocking, footsteps, sometimes voices in the hallway. But whenever anyone went to check, there was nothing there." She lowered her voice. "The staff thought it was just us old folks imagining things. But I know what I heard. Did you ever recognize the voices?" Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. "Once or twice it sounded like my late husband calling for me. But that's silly, isn't it? Harold's been gone for 3 years." I asked if she was still hearing the sounds. "They stopped right after your dad passed," she said. "Haven't heard anything unusual since the day of his funeral. Strange timing, don't you think?" I drove home with Dad's notebook on the passenger seat, trying to make sense of what I'd learned. Dad had been hearing unexplained sounds for weeks before he died. Mrs. Patterson had heard them too, sometimes recognizing voices of deceased loved ones. The sounds had stopped when Dad died, but now I was hearing them at home. Was it possible that whatever had been bothering Dad at the assisted living facility had somehow followed me? Or was I just looking for patterns where none existed? Friday night, I made dinner and tried to act normal. I put on a movie, folded some laundry, did the kinds of mundane things that usually help me relax. But I kept thinking about Dad's notebook, especially that last entry where he'd crossed something out. Around 10:30, I was getting ready for bed when I heard my name, Rachel. Not from the front door this time. The voice came from the backyard, just outside my bedroom window. I froze with my toothbrush in my hand. The voice was quiet, almost conversational, like someone was standing in the yard having a normal conversation. "Rachel, I need to show you something." Same voice as Tuesday night. Definitely Dad's voice, with that slight rasp and the way he pronounced my name. But this time there was something different in the tone. Not urgent like before, but patient, like he was willing to wait. I went to the bedroom window and looked out. The backyard was dark except for the light from Mrs. Peterson's kitchen window next door. I couldn't see anyone, but the voice came again. "It's about your mother." My heart started racing. Dad never talked about Mom anymore, not since she died. In his final years, it seemed like he'd put away all his memories of her, like thinking about her was too painful. "What about Mom?" I called out, feeling ridiculous for having a conversation with my dark backyard. "She left something for you. Something I should have given you before." I waited for more, but the voice didn't continue. After a few minutes, I called out, "Where? What did she leave?" Silence. I stood at the window for another 20 minutes, but I didn't hear anything else. No footsteps, no voices, nothing unusual, just the normal sounds of a Friday night in September. This morning, I've been going through the house looking for anything that might have belonged to Mom that I hadn't found before. I checked the attic, the basement, even the closets I'd already cleaned out after she died. But I can't think of anywhere Dad might have hidden something from her. The voice said it was about Mom, that she'd left something for me. But Mom died 5 years ago, and Dad and I went through everything together back then. I kept her jewelry, some of her books, a few pieces of furniture. Dad kept her wedding ring and some photos. What could be left that I haven't seen? I keep thinking about that last entry in Dad's notebook, about how something had sounded familiar but impossible, and about Mrs. Patterson hearing her dead husband's voice in the hallway. Maybe grief does make you hear things. But it's strange that both Dad and Mrs. Patterson were experiencing similar phenomena at the same time, in the same place. And now it's happening to me. I don't know what to think anymore. Part of me wants to call Linda and tell her everything, but I'm worried she'll think I'm having some kind of breakdown and try to take care of me. Part of me wants to pack a bag and stay in a hotel until this all stops. But another part of me, the part that misses both my parents more than I usually let myself think about, wants to know what Dad was trying to tell me about Mom. I think I'm going to stay in the house tonight and see what happens. If the voice comes back, maybe I'll try to ask more questions. Maybe I'll find out what Mom supposedly left for me. Or maybe I'll just prove to myself that I'm imagining all of this. I'll post another update if anything else happens. I wasn't sure I'd ever post again after what happened this weekend, but I feel like I owe an explanation to anyone who's been following my story. I'm still trying to process everything myself. Saturday night, I decided to wait in the backyard. If Dad's voice was going to come back talking about Mom, I wanted to be ready to hear what he had to say. I know how that sounds, but after finding his notebook and talking to Mrs. Patterson, I couldn't shake the feeling that something real was happening. I made coffee around 10 p.m. and sat on the back porch steps with a blanket. The night was clear and warm, typical for late September. I brought Dad's notebook with me and read through it again by the porch light, paying special attention to that last entry where he'd crossed something out. Around 11:30, I heard him. "Rachel." The voice came from near Mom's old garden, the patch of ground where she used to grow tomatoes and herbs. It's been overgrown for years now. "I'm here," I said, feeling only slightly ridiculous. "Look under the loose floorboard in the basement, behind the water heater." I knew exactly what he was talking about. There's a section of basement flooring that's always been a little uneven, right behind the old water heater that hasn't worked in 10 years. As kids, my cousin Tommy and I used to hide things under there when we played. "What's under there, Dad?" But the voice didn't answer. I waited for another hour, but that was it. Sunday morning, I went down to the basement with a flashlight and a screwdriver. The floorboard came up easily. It had never been properly nailed down. Underneath, wrapped in an old pillowcase, was a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside the box were letters, maybe 20 of them, all addressed to me in Mom's handwriting. The envelopes were yellowed with age, and they weren't postmarked. Written across the top of each one was a year. For Rachel, age 16. For Rachel, age 21. For Rachel, wedding day. For Rachel, when you have children. The last envelope said, "For Rachel, when I'm gone." I sat on the basement floor and read that one first. "My dearest Rachel," it began, "if you're reading this, then I've passed away, and your father has finally done what I asked him to do. I wrote these letters when you were 12, after my first cancer scare. I wanted to make sure I could still be part of your life for all the important moments, even if I wasn't there to see them. She explained that she'd asked Dad to hide the letters and give them to me when the time was right for each one. But after she died, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He'd told her he would, but when the moment came, it felt too painful. He probably thinks he's protecting you from more sadness, she wrote. But I hope someday he'll understand that love doesn't end with death. These letters are my way of telling you that I'll always be proud of you, no matter what path your life takes. I opened the one marked for Rachel, age 21, and found a letter full of advice about college, independence, and believing in myself. The wedding day letter talked about love and partnership, and how proud she would have been to see me in a wedding dress. There was even one for your first heartbreak that was so perfectly timed it made me cry. Each letter was like getting a piece of my mother back. Her voice, her wisdom, her terrible sense of humor. She'd somehow anticipated the moments when I'd need her most and found a way to be there anyway. The strangest part was reading the letter marked, "After your father dies." She'd known somehow that he wouldn't be able to give me the letters himself. "Your father is a good man," she wrote, "but he carries guilt like other people carry wallets. He'll blame himself for not giving you these sooner, but I want you to know that the timing doesn't matter. Love finds a way to reach us when we need it most." I spent the rest of Sunday reading through all the letters, crying and laughing and feeling like I was having conversations with my mother again. She'd included inside jokes, family stories I'd forgotten, and advice that was so specific to my personality, it was like she'd known exactly who I'd become. Monday morning, I called Linda and told her about finding the letters. I didn't mention the voice in the backyard, just said I'd been looking through the basement and found the loose floorboard. "Oh, honey," Linda said, and I could hear her crying on the other end of the phone. "Your mother made your father promise to give you those. He felt so guilty about it after she died. He kept saying he would, but then years went by and he thought it was too late. Why didn't you tell me? It wasn't my place. And honestly, I thought he'd eventually work up the courage to do it himself." That explained so much about Dad's behavior in his final years. The way he'd get quiet whenever anyone mentioned Mom, the guilt that seemed to weigh on him more and more as time passed. He'd been carrying this secret for 5 years, unable to fulfill the last promise he'd made to his wife. Linda came over Monday evening and we read through some of the letters together. She cried over the one where Mom had written about Linda being like a sister to her, and how grateful she was that Linda would be there to help take care of me. "This sounds just like her," Linda said, laughing through her tears at one of Mom's terrible jokes. She always did think she was funnier than she actually was. "It's been a week now since I found the letters, and I haven't heard Dad's voice again. No knocking, no footsteps, no mysterious sounds of any kind. The house feels quiet in a different way now, peaceful instead of empty. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. Maybe it really was grief making me hear things, and I just got lucky finding the letters when I did. Maybe Mrs. Patterson and Dad were experiencing some kind of shared psychological phenomenon at the assisted living facility. Maybe there's a rational explanation for everything that happened. But I keep coming back to the fact that I found exactly what the voice told me to look for, in exactly the place it described. And those letters were something I needed to find, something that's helped me understand both my parents better. I've read Mom's letter about grief several times now. She wrote about how love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It just changes form. Sometimes it shows up as memories, sometimes as dreams, sometimes as the feeling that someone is watching over you. And sometimes, she wrote, if we're very lucky and very much loved, it shows up as exactly what we need, exactly when we need it most. I don't know if Dad's spirit somehow led me to those letters, or if my subconscious mind put together clues I didn't realize I'd noticed. I don't know if Mrs. Patterson really heard her husband's voice, or if Dad actually experienced the things he wrote in his notebook. What I do know is that I have 20 letters from my mother that I didn't have 2 weeks ago. Letters that feel like gifts, like getting to talk to her again about all the things we never got to discuss. And I know that my father, despite his guilt and his inability to follow through on his promise, loved me enough to make sure I'd find them eventually. The voice hasn't come back, and I don't expect it to. Whatever Dad needed to tell me, I think he's told me. Whatever he needed me to find, I've found it. Sometimes love does find a way, I probably won't be posting here again, but thank you to everyone who read my story and offered support. I hope if any of you are dealing with your own unexplained experiences, you find the answers you're looking for, whatever form those answers might take.